All right, dessert is being delivered. Because you guys all earned it. You've been such great attendees tonight. We decided that you definitely needed some dessert. So, earlier tonight, the candidates randomly drew their speaking order and envelopes containing the list of questions that they will be asked. I'm very serious about the rules here if you haven't already learned that. And if you need a copy of them, which I have to edit thanks to Congressman Estes, I'm giving you credit. The questions will cover a wide range of issues, including trade policy, tax reform, labor and workforce issues, healthcare, immigration, and energy. They will receive their envelopes about 10 minutes before it's their turn to take the stage. And we do have a few other rules tonight for the rest of you. We ask that you refrain from interrupting the candidates when they are answering the questions. No booing or taunting, and I'm not going to name names. You may take pictures, but no video recording or audio recording, unless you are a member of the media on official assignment. So former journalists, they don't count. We are recording this, so we will be sharing it with you so that you can watch it back to double check to make sure that what the question that Alan answered really was the question. And Eric Stafford is our timekeeper tonight, so hopefully we will stay on time. And with that, I will turn things over to my boss, Alan Cobb, President and CEO of the Kansas Chamber.
So, booings and taunts are A-OK for me. One thing that we didn't recognize is our former Kansas board chair people. I'm looking at Gary Mason, Bill Pickard, Bill somewhere around here, Justin Hill, and Chuck Greer was here earlier, but I think he left as far as a chairperson. So I appreciate all the board involvement and appreciate your passion for the chamber. So our first candidate, it's like this is where I am, the price is right? Come on down, Tracy. Tracy Mann, Republican District CD1, which is now really, really big. It's always been big. So but thank you for being here, and thank you everybody for being here. This is kind of unique, where we've got 7 of the 8 candidates for the congressional races here. And I mentioned Sharice Davids cannot be here, but we have a DC fly-in next week. She will be there. So it just didn't work out with schedules. So I think you've already seen the rules. So you got 30 seconds. Why did you decide to run for Congress?
Thank you for having me, Alan. Thanks you all for being here. As I look at the country, there's really 3 threats, I think, if you're going to summarize sort of where we're at. We're 248 years into this great experiment that is the United States of America. Our 3 threats are our debt, $35 trillion, China, which we've had our head in the sand, I believe, for far too long. And we've drifted from our basic founding fundamental values of, I would define as faith, family, hard work, personal responsibility, having a border, innovation and not regulation. We have a lot of work to do to get this country back on track, and so that's why I'm running again. And I would just say real quick, I hope tonight we can kind of take it in. I mean, forums like this, we kind of lose sight of the fact that these don't occur in China, in Russia, in Venezuela, in North Korea. Like, how blessed are we that we even get to have forums like this where we have multiple candidates running for the same position peacefully. So pretty incredible, and thank you to the Kansas Chamber for pulling this together.
Good point, and I try to add some humor to this. I think about Caddyshack. Danny, do we live in Russia? No, we don't live in Russia.
You just referenced Caddyshack?
I did. So, yeah, thank you for that. So, Eric, that doesn't count against his time when I do stuff like that. So let's, you mentioned a lot of international things. Trade is a big, big issue for Kansas because we export lots of stuff, ag, airplanes, technology, a lot of manufactured products. And there are conversations now about tariffs, et cetera, and have China been in the WTO? Do you have a particular point of view on trade policies? That's a very broad question.
Very, very broad question. I've been very frustrated and very vocal with this administration's lack of focus on trade. We have got to continue to focus on trading throughout the world and developing new trade partners. I think about, my district's the number 3 ag district in the whole country.
I thought it was number 1.
We are number 1 for beef production, which I appreciate everybody eating steak. Number 1 for milo, number 1 for wheat, but overall we're number 3. But you look at the importance of trade to Kansas, aviation, but our ag products. And this administration has not had a single new trade deal that they've negotiated, and really a complete lack of focus on trade. We've got to continue to invest there. We've got to think about who should our trading partners be in 2040, 2050, and be working to build those relationships today to be less beholden to China and other countries that wish us ill.
So let me follow up on that. And Shireen guaranteed all the candidates that I'm not going to go off the script, which I'm not going to go completely, except for Caddyshack references. What countries do you think we should have trade deals? We had stuff pending with Kenya, I think, in UK, but what countries do you think?
Yeah, there's
a
lot of opportunity in Africa. Okay. A lot of opportunity in Southeast Asia. You look at the amount of beef grown in Kansas, produced in Kansas, that goes to Japan today, a result of Trump reworking that. Of course, you look at the MCA, relationship with Mexico and Canada. I'm a free trade guy, but we've got to keep our eye on the ball. We've got to realize that when we can add value to our products, not just in the United States, but in Kansas, before we push them out to other states and across the seas, that's good for our state, and we should support that.
Let me ask you some questions about technology. Artificial intelligence is certainly becoming an issue, and there's questions about regulation, but also about how you regulate internet content, etc. So I'm going to try to ask these broad questions rather than a specific bill. But do you have perspectives on what Congress should or should not do about artificial intelligence or content moderation and other things that relate to technology and innovation?
Yeah, great question. I think we got to first off acknowledge that this country our economy is built on innovation, not regulation. And when you take the resources in this country, coupled with the freedoms we have to use those resources to turn a profit that our entrepreneurs and our businesses do, second to none. So my big thing as we think about AI and these emerging technologies, let's make darn sure that we don't overregulate them and push them to other countries. Let's make sure that these things are happening right here in the United States of America. Now, are there some regulations we're going to need on AI, specifically, where it's campaign season, right, Alan? And so if somebody creates an ad that has someone else's image on it and it looks like them speaking, but it's not really them, I think, of course, we all would agree we need to prevent that from happening. We need to prevent nefarious actors from doing bad things, but we've got to make sure we do not overregulate and stifle these emerging technologies, because we do them better than anyone else, and let's benefit from it.
Let me ask an energy question. I would say the Chamber's position on energy is all of the above, whether it's solar, wind, fossil fuels, or, sorry, another joke, gerbils on a wheel. If that produces electricity, we're for it. Just don't subsidize it. Some of the things that have been discussed at the federal level is to make it easier to produce energy. The Energy Permitting Reform Act for Manchin and Barrasso, Senator Joe Manchin from West Virginia, John Barrasso from Wyoming, but it had to do with transmission and allowing transmission costs to be passed along to consumers. You could answer that however you want, but I'd love your just thoughts about our energy policy. Yeah, and energy is not just gasoline, but it's also production of electricity.
No, absolutely. I'm an all the above guy as well.
Gerbils too?
Canada, gerbils, you name it, whatever it takes, right? But again, you look at this country, we are so blessed with natural resources here. Why in the world we would have policies in our country that would stifle U.S. energy production to the benefit of Russia and other countries overseas? It makes absolutely no sense to me. So I think we need to make it easier, not harder, to produce energy right here in the United States. That particular bill, Alan, I'm not familiar with. I'd have to look at it. I would say this, as we talk about transmission lines, though, I do think it's very important. We must respect individuals' personal property rights. We need to make sure it goes through a process, and we got to make sure that taxpayer dollars are not being used to take away people's individual personal property rights.
I think I'm looking at Eric. We're probably getting, yeah. So the last question, and then you've got a 1 minute to do your closing. Obamacare, what is working or not working? Do you have any thoughts about healthcare insurance or anything else about healthcare? That rural Kansas has some unique challenges, which is most of your district outside of Lawrence. And what do you think the federal government could do?
Yeah, so I represent 60 of Kansas' 105 counties. I have more hospitals in my district than any district in the country. I have more critical access hospitals than any district in the country. We have 58 hospitals in my district. I toured 3 or 4 hospitals last week in the western part of our state. Our hospitals are struggling, and this is a problem today. It's about to become a huge problem. I know for certain that we should not have government mandates through CMS to require certain staffing levels to make it. We need to make it easier for our rural hospitals, all hospitals in Kansas, to care for patients, which is at the heart of what everybody wants to do, not more difficult, more expensive. Specifically, bigger picture, I think we got to figure out how do we have insurance companies able to compete more across state lines. I think that is something, we were told when the Affordable Care Act got jammed through reconciliation that you wouldn't lose your doctor and your healthcare costs wouldn't go up. Does anyone believe that that's true? I don't think anyone believes that's true at this day and age. But a lot of work we've got to do to keep our hospitals going and to address the healthcare costs in this country.
So I think we're about final question. So 1 minute. Why should the Kansas business community in your district vote for you to serve them in Congress?
Yeah, well, it's a huge honor to get to serve. I'm a kid from Quinter, Kansas. I never imagined growing up that I would. I didn't know places this nice existed. Number one. Number two, I never imagined I would meet a member of Congress, much less get to go to work with some. I would say this. Fundamentally, I believe that there's an inverse correlation between the size of government and individual freedom. And if you grow government, you're going to shrink freedom. And if you shrink government, you're going to grow freedom. And you look at the size of the federal government, how it's skyrocketed, really for the last 25 years, but especially since COVID, that should concern every freedom-loving American, in my view. The other big thing is taxes. All of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, all those provisions expire here in about 14 months. Rest assured that I'm going to be banging the drum to make sure we extend those and make sure that we make a tax favorable policies here in the United States, as we're not only to benefit us, but as we compete against countries overseas. So, Alan, thanks for having me.
Tracy, thank you, Congressman. I appreciate you running and appreciate your service. Take care. Number 2 is Dr. Prasanth Reddy. Come on down. How are you? The stairs are over there, so they made sure I didn't have stairs, so I can't leave. So opening question, as we mentioned, 30 seconds. Why'd you decide to run for Congress?
That's an easy one, Alan. I've had the ability to live the American dream, and I'm a cancer doc, I'm a military veteran, I'm a business person, and I am very concerned about the direction of our country, and I want to do everything I could to secure the American dream for future generations.
Great answer. So just so everybody knows, I'm not going to ask all of the candidates the same questions, but there's going to be a theme here, and I am not going to go off script. So we'll talk about immigration for you as an immigrant. I think this is relevant. Should there be a pathway to legal immigration, or what should that pathway be for folks that are moving to the United States from other countries? And that is a huge issue for Kansas Chamber members, just from our workforce, and a lot of smart people out there, and they just can't get here legally. So what are your thoughts?
Well, the first thing I would say is I am very much pro-immigration. I've been down to the border, and immigrants are the driving engine of this country, right? We are a melting pot. We are a country of immigrants. We're all immigrants, right? And so we should be pro-immigration. The question is what's the right policy? And I'll just speak for Indian Americans for a second, right? There are folks that have tried to do this the right way. Like my family, we're legal immigrants. My parents got here in the late 70s. It took us almost 20 years 20 years, right? And that's not right. The folks that are doing it the right way are being punished, and we're letting people kind of jump the line, and we got to do better, right? Now, for the needs of this country, there are other ways to meet those needs. Work programs, right? Amnesty is not a solution. It's not a labor solution. And geographic convenience shouldn't be a moral argument for amnesty either. I mean, there were folks that we left in Afghanistan that, had an absolute moral right to be here. And the way that we left Afghanistan was not a good situation. So I don't think amnesty is the right solution. I do think there should be a pathway, but I think we need to set the rules and not have clear-cut rules on, that's what businesses require, right? Just give us rules. But when we don't have rules and the rules keep changing on us, it's hard to have a forward-facing policy that makes sense. So the long and short of it is simple, right? Which is, of course, pro-immigration, of course, meet the needs of our country, particularly the business needs. But there are different pathways we can pursue, like work programs, work visas, that we should really think about, as opposed to other mechanisms, having folks come here illegally.
Thank you. So we'll ask energy, which I asked Congressman Mann a little bit about this. So fracking has been in the news because of the Democrat nominee Kamala Harris saying that she supports fracking, and fracking has certainly happened here in Kansas. Do you have any thoughts about that? Should there be more regulations, less regulations? But you can also expand on that on anything about energy if you feel appropriate.
No, I appreciate it, Alan. It's another critical question, right? Energy is a driving element of our economy and of our quality of life. And of course, we want a sound energy policy. And so what I would tell you is fracking, I think we should be very aggressive on American energy independence. And it's critical for our quality of life. It's critical to meet the needs of our businesses and our citizens. And so I would say we should do everything possible to have a aggressive energy policy, less regulation, more ability to meet the energy needs of our country. Another comment I'd make is not having these energy policies has implications on foreign policy. Tracy mentioned this, right? I mean, part of this is that without a rational energy policy, renewables like solar and wind can only probably meet 20% of our energy needs. Nuclear is something we should explore, but we should unlock American energy. We should unlock American innovation and figure out how to get these innovative energy solutions in place for our citizens. It'll be better for the entire world. I'll just throw in one other fact, Alan. America produces the cleanest energy in the world. We've reduced emissions by almost 80%, and that is a big deal. When we look to the rest of the world to come up with solutions, they're failing. We're the ones that are driving innovation in energy, and we should unlock that. And if we're able to effectively do that, I think the benefits are multiple, including, as I said, reducing the ability of bad actors, as Tracy put them, like the new axis of evil, right? China, North Korea, Iran, and Russia, from taking, let's just say, foolish adventures invading other countries. They would be much more unlikely to be able to do that if we had a better energy policy.
Thank you. So we got 4 minutes left. So the other candidates, look at Eric, that good-looking guy over there with the blue tie, on the timing. So let's talk about trade and tariffs. That has been an interesting issue where sometimes the parties coalesce on tariffs. Our general point of view from the Kansas Chamber is tariffs are not good. We focus on state house issues, not federal issues, but wanted to get your thoughts about trade and tariffs.
Look, at the end of the day, I'm a free market guy, just like Tracy, and I'm sure a number of the other candidates. That's what I believe. I think free markets work. It's a core principle of economies that you unlock the potential of the people. you unlock the potential of businesses, they're going to do well. Right? Less regulation, more innovation, leave it in the hands of our people. That is what has driven up, quality of life in this country for the 250 or so approximate years that we've existed. So in general, am I a huge fan of tariffs? Generally speaking, no. Right? But if it's a tool, and we want to consider it in our armamentium of tools to consider, I don't think I would just, 100% just rule out the possibility of tariffs, because I think it's going to depend on each specific situation. By the way, if you came to me for cancer and you said, what are you going to do? I wouldn't just give you a boilerplate answer. I mean, it depends on the specifics. And so depending on that specific economic situation, depending on those details, the numbers, then we should think through whether it makes sense or not to consider that as an economic tool. But generally speaking, I'd say no.
I'm looking at Eric to figure out which question I have. Okay, this is probably a 2-minute question. Federal budget. How do you balance it? How about that for a question?
There you go. That's an easy one, right?
But what do you think is a pathway to balance it, and your thoughts about debt and deficit?
Look, this is an existential threat to this country. Each year now, with a $35 trillion national debt, we spend $1 trillion a year just on interest. As citizens, we're all carrying an extra $200,000 per person credit card bill. That is unacceptable. We have got to do better, not so much just for the folks in this room, but for our loved ones, our kids, our grandkids, our nephews and nieces. That's who deserves better. And so we as adults in the room have to come together and say, well, how are we going to fix this? So it is absolutely, at least an element of it is spending. And we have to do a much better job of controlling spending. We cannot tax our way out of spending. And that is a problem. So what I would start is every department. I'm a 20-year Air Force guy. Does the DOD have fraud, waste, and abuse? Somebody's going to hit me upside the head, but I guarantee you the answer is yes. So there is no department in the federal government that is free from having the scrutiny, and it's the job of Congress. It's the job of all of us that are existing Congress folks and hopefully folks that get to the finish line to take that task on, and make sure that we're effectively spending taxpayer dollars.
Last question. So you got a minute or a little less than a minute, or take the full minute. Why should the Kansas business community in your district vote for you?
So first thing, I'm a Kansan, right? I've spent 40 years of my life in Kansas. I grew up in Manhattan, Kansas. I'm a K-Stater. I went to KU for medical school. I'm also a business person. I've lived this. I'm a Harvard Business School alum. I run $1 billion service line, $1 billion business, and I've also run a small business. So I know what the folks in the audience are going through. I can relate. I'm going to be a champion. I believe in free markets. I believe in less regulation. And I believe in unlocking the power of businesses to meet the needs of our citizens. That's through products and services that you all provide. The question is how best we do that? Well, you need a champion. You need allies that understand what businesses do, the role that businesses play in our communities. It's work ethic, right? That people don't think about it. That's important. Culturally, that's important. Another thing that work provides is some meaning in life. That's a cultural thing. And then, of course, we provide products and services. But what businesses represent in the community is more than just dollars and cents. And that's what I want to fight for, is I want to unlock businesses in Kansas to provide the best for our communities.
Thank you, Doctor, very much. And thank you for running.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Our next contestant is Congressman Ron Estes. Thank you, Ron, for being here.
No, thank you.
Okay, so you know the deal by now, right? So you've got 30 seconds. Why did you decide to run for Congress 7 years ago? And by the way, I should say, we ran against each other and we're still friends. It's not a big deal.
Speak for yourself.
Okay. Hey, I got the better job.
So I just wanted to start off with, that wasn't the joke I planned to start with, but we are friends. The joke I was going to start with is going back to the AI question you asked earlier. Is if you would just superimpose my face and picture over all of Tracy's answers, I'd be happy. In terms of, and we'll see at the end of my 10 minutes whether I did a good enough job matching that. But I filed to run again for Congress for a couple of reasons. One, I think the debt is a huge issue that we've got to address, and I know it's been talked about before. And just looking at where we are with the debt and the impact there, and it's a tough issue at some point in time because there's going to be some tough decisions that we have to make. It's not just you can't grow your way out of it, and so we've got to focus on how do we accomplish that. That's one of the reasons why I got on the budget committee this year, was specifically to focus on the debt and the deficit. The other piece is looking at how do we address and continue to grow the economy. And some of the focus that we have on the Ways and Means Committee is looking at how do we keep a good trade practices and policies going forward. How do we have good tax policies, which next year is going to be a huge issue on taxes. And so I want to be involved in that process of how do we make sure we address those issues and move things forward.
Well, so let's go back to the debt and deficit. Like, this is not something that gets solved next budget year. So what is a path forward to beginning to reduce that, the debt and the deficit? So the debt is the long-term debt, and the deficit is the annual budget debt.
Right.
Deficit.
So it's talked about before, and Dr. Reddy mentioned that $35 trillion. That's what we owe now. The $260. Everybody in this room owes $260,000, and all of your friends and relatives outside the room owe an additional $260,000 in the current debt. And at the spending level that we're at right now, 1 out of every $4 that the federal government spends is borrowed. 1 out of every $4. And that equates to about $80,000 a second is being borrowed. So we're borrowing more than the median income of a Kansas household every second through that process. So obviously there's some tough things we have to address. The discretionary spending, which we're going to talk about a lot over the next few months as we go to appropriate for 2025, the discretionary spending is less than 25%. So even if we appropriated $0 for defense, for labor department, for health and human services, for executive branch, for the legislative branch, accumulated $0 for them, we'd still be borrowing money to fund the automatic program. So not only do we have to talk about the discretionary spending, but we've also got to make some hard discussions around Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, food stamp program, WIC, TANF, some of those programs that prior Congresses put in place to happen on an automatic basis. And we've got to have some hard choices. And I know there were a couple of us that were talking earlier. Kyle Hoffman was here talking about his CRP ground that his family has. And he was talking about the current rate of payment that they get on the CRP ground is $47 an acre. He said if he went out and did a cash lease of that land, it'd be about $18 an acre. So there's some things, some decisions that we have to make on things, and how do we address those? I could go through a lot of different scenarios on different issues, but we've got to dive into those, and it's not just discretionary, but it's also looking at some of those other programs as well.
Immigration, I think I can't, I know you're just the third candidate, but I feel like I've asked this, but what's your solution on illegal immigration and legal immigration?
Yeah, so
in 30 seconds.
So we need to make legal immigration easier and illegal immigration harder. That's the core process of what we need to look at. There's enough things wrong with the legal immigration process that's out there. I mean, whether you're trying to become a citizen and going through that process, there's stumbles along the way. If you come to one of our great universities and get a degree, you can't always get a work permit to come to work in the United States. So we send all this brain power back to their home country where they don't want to go, but then they start up companies and compete against us. And so legal immigration, we have to have a focus on how do we improve that, but also the border security has become an issue now, and it's related to immigration, but it's different. And I kind of make concentric rings around that in terms of talking about that, because there is a relationship there. But we can't have unlimited open access. I mean, no country in the world does that, just because you have to have some laws around what the process is. And we want to make sure that we tie in, as we have folks coming in with visas to work or other presences, that they're actually working and bringing in skill sets that help the United States, not just, well, I want to make more money, or in the case of so much of what we see today with the cartels on the Mexican side, bringing in gang members in the United States, there's people from over 160 countries that have crossed the border into the United States illegally. They avoided a checkpoint and came across the border because they wanted to get into the country. And so it's not just a South American, Central America issue through that process. It's a money-making issue that's out there. We've got to make sure that we can address the border issue so that we can get back to immigration. And we had a pretty good bill in 2018. It needed a couple of tweaks around H-2B and H-2A visas and the process there. But we ran out of time with it being an election year. And so we need to get back and have a secure border so we can work on immigration.
I'm looking at Eric. What's our time? Okay, so plenty of time for like 10 more questions.
All right, let's make sure we get to the last one.
So yes, we will get to the last one. Your thoughts on trade and tariffs? Like we've talked about, Kansas is a big exporting state, but we also import a lot of things. And I think both candidates for president have talked about tariffs, and just your thoughts about trade and the role Congress should or could have with that.
Yeah. So Congress has authority and responsibility for trade. It's embedded in the responsibility of the Ways and Means Committee. We've got to make sure that we address that and use that responsibility appropriately. I think, as kind of been said before, is that there have been more people lifted out of poverty over the last 70 years through free markets and free and fair trade. And we need to make sure we continue that process going forward. Now, we do have instances in some countries and some products of dumping, and so we got to address those. And tariffs are probably the best way to do that with some of those products. And then there's also the issue of the Chinese Communist Party and the issues where they're intentionally going out and blowing up industries by undercutting them through the process of what they do in order to take over. They've done it with steel, they've done it with solar panels, they've done it with a host of other things. So we need to make sure that in those cases tariffs make sense, but otherwise tariffs are tax. I mean, that's why it's a Ways and Means Committee, is because the tariff was designed as a tax, as a revenue generator.
Last question, why should the Kansas business community and CD4 vote for you?
So I spent most of my career in the private sector looking at how do we solve problems. I did working both with computer systems and working with Six Sigma processes, a lot with manufacturing distribution companies. And so I see the value of how in the private sector that you can make things better, that you can actually deliver results, that you have the freedom to make those decisions, and people have the choices of what they want to do. And we should make sure that we continue to focus on that. We should, the policies that we put in place at the federal level should help make sure that we incentivize economic growth, incentivize that innovation that America's so fond of. I mean, we've invented everything from air conditioners to zippers, and we need to keep that innovation going forward so that we can continue to be a leader in the world.
Thank you, Congressman Ron Estes. Appreciate you being here. Take care. Good job. Before I call our next contestant, Nancy Boyda, I just want to give credit to Shireen Jones-Sontag, who came up with this format 7 years ago, because the parties had all these weird rules about who can host a debate and who can and what are the rules. Like, well, you can only have this many people or whatever. So Shireen came up with the idea of like, well, let's just have a conversation. So I kind of joked with Ron, like the point of this is having a conversation, not asking former Congressman Boyda about how do you solve Middle East peace and
I have the answer.
And you got 45 seconds. So anyway, Shireen and the team give her credit for coming up with this format, which I find very good. Oh, come
It's
on. Louder than that. Okay, thank you. So I should have mentioned, I think everybody knows, but where all the candidates are running, but Nancy Bourdet is running as a Democrat here in CD2, which I'd say here in CD2, Congressional District 2, which is Topeka, southeast Kansas, and
half of Kansas City, half of Wyandotte
we
County
probably
now.
should have had a map out, but so you heard the opening question. Why did you decide to run again for Congress?
Right.
Wasn't once enough?
It's a good question. So I am so concerned about what is going on in our country. I don't care who you talk to, and I just say we have so much broken trust. We are so divided, and I don't care which side of the aisle people go, yes. And I believe my campaign slogan is the solutions are in the center. That's who I was when I was in Congress 18 years ago, 16 years ago. I was very much of a centrist, very much broke with my party, very visibly, did anything that I could to work with people. And quite honestly, is there anybody else in the 2nd District? I look around and go, is there anyone else? And there just wasn't. So that's why I'm doing this. I am that concerned about our country. And I didn't see anybody else being able. I call myself bilingual. I grew up in a very Republican household. So doing anything I can to get the right and the left to speak to each other. That's just what I've been about for 20 years.
Thank you for that. So again, some of the questions are the same. So let me just go back to the question I just asked about trade and your thoughts about tariffs and trade and what the Congress might be able to do to improve our ability to export and maybe import, but more importantly export, and the role of tariffs, good or bad?
Yeah, we'll talk tariffs first if that's okay, because that's a little bit easier to talk about. So I have said with tariffs, we have the dollar tree, it's now the $1.25 tree. Right? If we keep on a bunch of tariffs, we're going to have the $1.50 tree. So I am not a fan of tariffs. Do they have places? Of course they do in certain very, very targeted areas. But I think we all know the devastation that the tariffs have brought on to our Kansas farmers. It has been devastating. And there's always an upside. Tariffs sound like they're a really good thing, it's a very populist message, but the fact is they are, who said earlier, they're a tax. And so I am not, I would take targeted tariffs, yes.
This is a question I haven't asked the others, but it's not a gotcha thing since you're a former member. So the Kansas delegation has 6 members, so we're a small state. How do you increase Kansas's influence? And I guess a follow-up to that, which I meant to ask earlier, but we run out of time, is the Congress doesn't seem to be very productive today.
Really?
So regardless of who's in power.
Right.
So maybe you tackle both of those. Like what can Kansas do to increase our influence with 6 members of a federal delegation?
Well, I would tell you that I know I'm idealistic. I know that. I am very idealistic. But we were talking at our table today, and what did I say tonight? If you all, God bless you all, if you all don't put pressure on the congressional delegation to get together and to work on behalf of Kansas, you are not doing your job. I will go to Congress, but it will be on my terms, Alan, and I want some things to change when I get there. This dysfunction is absolutely killing our country, not to mention that the distrust. So we all can do this. So we were just talking about that. I would love to say, how do we, Tracy, how do we work together? I think Kansans can lead the way, and that sounds like some stupid campaign slogan, right? Kansans can lead the way on bringing our country together. Tracy, I expect you to work with me. I expect you to work together, and very visibly, and it will cost you politically, and it will cost me. I will hold you all accountable for that when we're there. We have to do better. So we all know what happens when Congress doesn't get along. What happens? We have executive actions, right? Whoa. You know, everybody's got, their necks are completely out of shape because of all the whiplash. When Congress doesn't do its job, it's executive action on both sides, and it's just got to stop.
I think this is a question I think I've asked everybody. Get already losing track. The government debt deficit. Your thoughts about how best to solve it. How did we get there? Again, you were a member of Congress. So
I was.
You voted for some of these budgets, but I don't know if you voted for all the budgets. But how do we get out of it, and how big of an issue and concern is it to you?
Okay. So the deficit is a huge concern to me. I was raised by very, very conservative parents who grew up in the Ozarks during the Depression. So waste not, want not is stuck across here, emblazoned. So I will say some things that may be uncomfortable, but in the previous administration, go look for yourselves. Please don't trust me. Our deficit spending was $8.4 trillion in those 4 years, including COVID. Including COVID with this, we're at about 4.5, maybe 4.7 by the time we're done. And I'm not suggesting that 4.7, which is a huge improvement, but both sides need to take some accountability here. So, and 4.7 is way too much. How do we do it? We watch how we tax and how we don't tax. Taxing is absolutely part of it. I love you all dearly, but our corporate tax rate is the lowest that has been in 80 years. And we want to take another 20% lower and then talk about the deficit. It just doesn't work for me. I would not have also, on the spending side, I would have said, why are we forgiving school loans? Why would we do that? Would we forgive school loans maybe for teachers, for public servants that we don't pay enough? Yeah, I talk about that. But I want to watch how we're spending, so it's both sides. But the fact is we have to get real about what's going on. It is our future. Everyone who has said that they're concerned about our future, I was raised to live within my means when I was growing up, and our country needs to do the same.
Looking at Eric, because I know we're getting close. 3.
Okay.
So probably.
Did that answer the question?
Well.
Okay. Yes.
This group decides, not me.
All right.
So rural Kansas has, there's plenty of bright spots in rural Kansas, but there's also some areas that are struggling.
Oh, my heavens.
What federal policies do you think that you would support or could happen that would help some of the rural Kansas economies get a little bit better?
Before we get too far, I wanted to talk about housing. I've told Alan that I know when I come to the chamber, I've got one thing that I want to talk about: jobs. I'm a Democrat. We talk about jobs. Go look at the numbers, cut them any way that you want to. Democrats are going to be out there producing jobs, but right now we need housing, right? So when we come to rural Kansas, it costs you how much more? How much does it cost you to build a house? $300,000, $250,000? You can't sell it for that. So we're upside down on everything. I believe we are now at a deficit after the 2008 crisis. We lost so many of our builders, and then they did what the free market does. And they built housing that was more expensive. It's what they did. We need to invest up and down the district, in urban and in rural, to make sure that we have affordable, safe housing. We are in a crisis. We are at least hundreds of thousands of housing starts never happened since 2008. Hundreds of thousands. We're someplace between 3 and 5 million housing short, plus about 7 million rental units. That's what we need to do to bring jobs. Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry. No, timing is good because you finished it. You got 1 minute to answer why the Kansas business community and CD2 should vote for Nancy Boyer.
Right, because I have supported business. I was very much of a huge fan and worked together so much with the Kansas Bankers Association, with small banks. I was right there with the Kansas Pharmacy Association. Anything with the word community in there, I was right there. We do have now an independence in the district that wasn't in there. We have aircraft manufacturing now, and I'll be happy to work with them. I am very policy oriented. I work hard. I will listen to you and hear what you have to say, and then I will beg us all to get together with the entire delegation and say, how can we do this? How can we make business? We need to cut regulation. I get you on that. I hear you. I grew up in corporate America, and I hear you on that. And I will do everything I can not to add to that burden and to see how we can roll some of that back. First of all, we've got to stop all the executive orders. That means Congress has to do its job.
Thank you, Nancy. Very well. Very good. Just the next contestant, Paul Buskirk. So from CD1. CD1, I'd throw the CD, everybody knows what I mean when I say CD1, right? Congressional District 1, which, as Tracy already said, welcome, is a really, really big district. Also, wanted to mention, I keep looking over here at Doug Wareham. He keeps giving me the evil eye for not asking more banking questions. No, I'm kidding. But the Bankers Association is a big part of this event, and a great, you see their logo there, a great partner. Doug and I go way back. So if you want to learn about a lot of the folks we're all dealing with, talk to Doug and I later, maybe in about an hour. Right. So thank you for being here, Paul. So opening question, like you've heard, why did you decide to run for Congress?
I grew up in small town Nebraska, Holdridge, an ag community. My dad was a preacher, mom was a teacher, sister a nurse, brother a doctor. And I'm an educator. For the past 40 years, I've worked helping high school students get to college, helping college students finish their degrees and go on to produce their careers. And I've always known in that wonderful call to service that there would be an opportunity where there would be needs that would call me into a larger platform with a larger voice to be able to help more individuals. The bug in the works is trying to figure out when and where that's going to happen. The past couple of years have been very instrumental in my exploration process. And the one thing I've found, one thing I've learned in visiting with the great people in the 60 counties of the 1st District, is there is a common frustration, whether it's Republican or Democrat or unaffiliated, is the inability of our government to actually do its job. And I choose to believe, because Mom told me this and taught me this, that our representatives elected and appointed began their careers truly believing that they were there and called to serve. I believe that. I also observe that in the actions and decisions that many of these taken, that they've lost sight of that call to service. So if not now, when? And if not me, who?
The great, terrific answer. And well, follow up on that, which I just asked Nancy Boyd, since you're from rural Nebraska now to rural Kansas, what do you think the federal government could be doing better or differently to help the economies of rural Kansas?
There is a common folly of government that says because government can, is that government should. And despite whatever question you share with me, that might be part of my answer.
Okay.
Allow wonderful people, gifted, experienced, who are invested in moving forward our communities to help us find solutions instead of assuming that government comes over the top with all the answers, because that clearly is never the case. And since we're going down that path, one thing I do want to be able to share in my time with you is, first of all, politicians tell us what we want to hear, but leaders tell us what we need to know. If there is one issue and only one alone that Kansas business people should be watching in this election, it is that of immigration. We've touched that here a little bit, but we're going to take a little bit different turn in the process. First of all, the border. Both parties now have embodied secure the border. Well, duh, if any country in the world has one, it's their obligation to be able to manage it. But that is not the issue that should affect and will affect the economies and business of Kansas. It is the next layer of immigration behind the wizard in the curtain. Donald Trump has vowed repeatedly that should he be successful in getting back to the White House, on his first day in office, he will turn loose the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Police, and he will have them go out and identify, arrest, and deport every single undocumented individual in our country. Tens of millions of individuals be affected. The official estimates in the state of Kansas is that we have 62,000 undocumented residents in our state, which means the numbers are probably twice that. Most of our undocumented immigrant populations are in largely the southwest part of our state. They were drawn there by agriculture. They were drawn there by the meat packing plants in Dodge City, Garden City, and Liberal. Tremendous industry that goes on there. Those 4 plants together employ about 11,000 individuals and process 12,000 heads of cattle every day. What happens should deportation begin? What happens to the economy of our state? First of all, our labor force in that part of our state declines. The price tag of beef in the supermarket goes up. We saw this in COVID, labor shortages. That is what will happen. The price of beef cattle at the auction block will drop because the supply chain management could not keep up with the processing involved. What happens to the price of corn? The price of corn in this cycle, this harvest just beginning, is already projected to be a bumper crop, which also means that its prices will be low. And now the demand for feed corn, because of all the other factors, will drop even further. What is the impact to our economies? Our rents are dropping. Our sales tax receipts are dropping. And if anyone in this room is naive enough, and they're not because these are savvy business people, Alan, and I know that.
They hired me.
Yes, they did. If anyone outside this room is naive enough to believe that this will only encompass and insulate the southwest corner of our state, that would be sadly mistaken. There's no way to do that. Fuel prices will be affected, retail prices. And what will initially look like recession numbers will start smelling like depression numbers. That single decision, left or right, Democrat, Republican, right or wrong, can impact this economy and every person in this room. And why? Because the leader of that party believes that they can create more unity out of finding an enemy in the process. And that could not be more ludicrous to us. The great immigrants whom I've met and many of you have met across our state and in our district are first, second, third, and fourth generation. These are individuals that work hard in our communities. Their children and their grandchildren go to school with our children and our grandchildren. They sit in the same churches. They purchase at the same stores. These are our communities. It is Kansas' opportunity, because we can be a leader in this process, is to exactly what other speakers have said, embrace immigration. The Congressional Budget Office reported month before last that if when U.S. can get back to immigration numbers as pre-COVID, over the next 10 years, the economy will grow by trillions of dollars, and we could reduce the national debt by $900 billion simply by growing and being good neighbors of our families and friends in the 1st District and in our state. That is what is before us. Thank you for your patience, Ellen.
Well, no, the format is, 10 minutes. You can take 10 minutes to answer a question. You covered lots of things, and frankly, a couple of my other questions. I'm looking at Eric. I think we maybe have, so we have 2 minutes. So you got 2 minutes, including your last thing about why should the Kansas community vote for you. But like all these questions, there's no way you can answer them. And I couldn't answer them in a minute, but try. What role should Congress have in reviewing federal regulations? What was the role of Congress versus the executive branch with regulations? And remember, we only have a couple of minutes, and you got a minute for your close.
Well, Supreme Court already ruled here recently that for the federal agencies to have autonomy without congressional oversight and intervention is against the law. So that puts the onus back on Congress to actually do the job that we've sent them there to do, which is to service. And the job will be enormous in that process. But I'll circle back to how we started the conversation.
Sure.
More times than not, just because government can does not mean the government should. Sometimes our legislature, both state legislature and U.S. legislature, we might be better benefited by having more recess time than actually in session time.
Perfect. So timing is good. Now, so last question: why should the Kansas business community in Congressional District 1 vote for you?
Politicians tell us what we want to hear. Leaders tell us what we need to know. Elections are about choices. They've always been about choices, and the choices involved in this election, the stakes are very high. I am not here to claim I am the better person. I've met Tracy as my opponent. I like him a lot. Process. The choices are those in this audience and outside this room to decide about the choices that my opponent has made and the choices that I make or will make. I believe in protecting reproductive rights of women. I believe in protecting America's freedom by supporting and giving weapons to Ukraine, because their freedom is our freedom. And I absolutely believe that embracing immigration, embracing and not deportation, is our way to freedom and to be able to expand this amazing economy in our state.
Thank you very much, and thank you for being here, and thank you for running. Absolutely. Last candidate, Derek Schmidt, former Attorney General, running for Congressional District 2. Derek, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Alan. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, and I know you have a booming voice, but use the mic anyway. If you were a sandwich, what kind of sandwich would you be? That was not on the list.
Don't take that off my time. That's, yeah.
That was not on the list. So I'm surprised I didn't think about asking this earlier, but the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act passed in 2017 is about to expire. I'm sorry?
Why is he ready?
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. First question, like I'm already getting to the end. Opening question, why are you running? Thank you, Shireen.
Yes, thank you, Shireen. That's good. So, well, thank you very much for hosting this to the Chamber. Thanks for all of you for being out. Thanks for the conversation. It was said at the start, and I'll say it at the end, how fortunate we are to be able to have these sorts of conversations as we choose together our direction going forward. It is a wonderful country that we live in. You know, look, I often summarize the answer to that question, why am I running, in this line. We live in serious times in our country with serious challenges, problems we need to make progress on, if not solve. And serious times call for serious minds. If it were easy, it would be done by now. The truth of the matter is we got to have folks who are willing to sort of get in, metaphorically roll up their sleeves and deal with the kinds of issues that we've been talking about here tonight, whether it's immigration policy, trade policy, tax policy, spending policy. If you kick it down the road again, it just gets worse for our kids. I'm in to be part of solving some of that.
Terrific. So I will thank you again, Sheree. It's like we have an informal process here. So I started to ask about the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and gosh, was it December 2017? Is going to expire in 2025. So it's going to cause a huge tax increase, but there's also a fiscal aspect to it. Do you support its continuation? Would you want to alter it in any way? Like, why or why not?
Yeah, I do support extending the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. I think we need to make its main provisions permanent. I think it has been a tremendous driver of growth. I think if you look at federal revenues, you had a slight dip after it was implemented, but revenues have continued to grow dramatically since then. We've seen business investment come home from abroad, which was one of the objectives, and every single American who pays taxes got some type of tax benefit from it. All of that gets reversed if we don't extend the provisions of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So we must do that. Now, to the more nuanced part of your question, I mean, I've served in a state legislature. I've been around Congress over the years. I have never seen a tax bill that just passes clean. That is not the way tax policy gets made in this country, and it's not what's going to happen with the extension on the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So we're going to have a debate, those who serve in Congress and those who are engaged in the process, about how you tweak it, what you do, what wasn't right in it, what can be done better in it. That's the nature of making tax policy, and I look forward to engaging in that. I mean, I'll give you one specific example. It's kind of down in the weeds, but it's something a lot of folks in the 2nd District business community have talked with me about. One of the pay-fors that was in the statute was extending out, amortizing the payback on some research and development investment. It used to be expensible in a single year. It's now stretched over multiple years. That has the effect of skewing R&D investment decisions, and not in a positive way. I'd like to see if we can figure out a way to undo what I think was a bad piece of policy in the statute as we go forward.
So we've talked about trade, I think, with all of the candidates. What do you think the role of Congress versus the executive branch, and also tariffs? I'll just throw out the kind of general trade and and free trade issue. Again, Kansas is a fairly significant exporting state.
Yeah, well, not surprisingly, I think nearly every candidate's said some version of this tonight. I am instinctively a free trade individual, and whoever said it, I think it was Ron, Congressman Estes said it. A tariff is a tax, and so I'm a low tax guy. I'm a low tariffs guy. Realistically, you can't be a zero tax guy because you have to pay for operations of government services. And realistically, you can't be a zero tariffs guy across the board in all cases. There are times that it makes sense from an American public policy standpoint to be very aggressive on trade policy. And sometimes a tariff has to be a tool that's in that toolbox. We've never had a time it wasn't, at least in modern American history. So that's not a groundbreaking statement. My philosophy is less is better. I certainly don't want to see. I'm made uneasy by some of the discussion in the campaign trail now, not our campaigns, but more generally in the country, about these sort of very aggressive, very large tariff increases. That is not where I'd like to see us go. But I also think we need to be mindful. I'll tell you a story just real quick, and then we can move on. But
hey, this is your time.
A lot's been said tonight, and I agree with it, about the critical importance of having open foreign markets where people in this room and others in the Kansas business community can sell our agriculture goods, our manufactured goods, our products, our services abroad. Absolutely true. That's why we want a good, strong U.S. trade representative to go do battle for us to open those markets. There is the other side of that, however, and I actually think this is one of the reasons President Trump won in 2016, and I saw it in my home. NAFTA philosophically was a free trade agreement that philosophically I think a lot of us that are free traders would agree with, but boy, I think it was improved by the USMCA update in this prior administration. And there were consequences to NAFTA that were real for real people in Kansas. I saw a major employer in my hometown in Independence close up shop after NAFTA, move its operations down to a new plant just south of the border and reopen it. And hundreds of people, most of whom I knew and grew up with their kids, who that had been their principal livelihood, in some cases for generations, to this day, they never found really solid, stable, reliable employment again. And what their government said to them was, you got to do this because it's for the good of the whole. It's better for everybody. Grows the economy, opens markets, rising tide floats all boats. Sorry how it affected you. Here's some trade adjustment assistance, a government payment. If you don't think those folks have a real and legitimate basis to be distressed about American trade policy, then I'd like to take you down and sit down with them sometime. There are real consequences to these choices. So my philosophy is less. I also recognize the reality. We got to be tough and do battle on some of this and defend our American interests.
Eric, how much time we got? 3:45. Oh, we have plenty of time to talk about world peace and
I'm for it.
Who is it? So the Inflation Reduction Act included a number of regulatory changes aimed at combating climate change, if you think it should be combated. What's your approach as a member of Congress about regulatory, you heard some of the other questions, but new rules and regulations, how do you review the old rules and regulations? What are your general thoughts about the role of the executive branch with rules and regs?
Yeah, well, the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, whatever you want to call it, was one of two principal big, enormous spending packages that passed during COVID, with COVID as the justification, or COVID's consequences as the justification, strictly on a party line vote, and I believe in both cases with Vice President Harris casting the tie-breaking vote. And I would argue, this wasn't your question, but I would argue they have been a huge contributor and a driver to the price hikes and the inflation we've seen around too many dollars chasing too few goods, too much overspending that wasn't necessary. So I'm not a big fan of the Inflation Reduction Act, which I think was wholly calling that bill the Inflation Reduction Act is like calling that city in southwest Kansas liberal Kansas. It's nice, but it is inaccurately named. And I think that's true for the IRA as well. With respect to the regulatory piece, however, look, we haven't talked a lot about it today. It's been mentioned a couple of times over the course of my friends and colleagues who have gone before me. But I actually think, one of the reasons I would like to serve right now, I think we have a moment in American history to actually do something about this explosive growth in the regulatory state, the federal regulatory state. Look, nobody's arguing you don't need federal agencies and you don't need federal regulation. generations. But it's an order of magnitude upon an order of magnitude upon an order of magnitude greater today than it was just 2 generations ago. People talk in terms of the fourth branch of the federal government, the unelected branch, the alphabet soup agencies, and there's a reason that people smile when you say that, because it's true. I would submit that there are more people in this room and people we work with and for and work for us out in the real world whose lives are affected more by decisions made by people, by regulators, by bureaucrats, whatever you want to call them, by the deep state. I mean, lots of different names that different people use, by federal employees who nobody's ever heard of and nobody ever voted for, than they will be by the decisions made by those of us running for public office and putting ourselves out there as candidates, because that's the point we've reached in this country. The reason we are at a moment we can do something about it is, it was alluded to a little earlier, we had not just one but a couple of decisions from the U.S. Supreme Court this past term. We had the rollback on Chevron deference. I think Paul mentioned that, if I'm not mistaken, which, you know, it's a huge step. Chevron was well intended. Justice Scalia cooked it up. I mean, it was designed to curtail an out-of-control judiciary. Unfortunately, that's not the problem we have right now. We have an out-of-control bureaucracy, and Chevron empowered that. And I think the court's decision to roll that back invites Congress to actually try to reassert some control. And the other decision was a Seventh Amendment decision that talks about agency fines. We can talk about it in a different setting, but it may actually be bigger than Chevron. So here's the bottom line. There is a moment to deal with this overregulation problem that I think is enormous, and I hear it everywhere I go in the 2nd District. Took us generations to get in. It'll take a long time to get out, and it's not going to be headline grabbing. It's going to be down in the weeds, roll up your sleeves, do the dirty work of oversight. If the press isn't noticing it, no criticism, it probably means you're doing your job pretty well in making agency managers answer for what they're doing.
So you're at your time, but we're still going to give you a close. I will just say it's kind of funny that, and Paul did a great job bringing up Chevron. Like, I suggested that's a question, and then Shireen asked me, well, how do you ask the question? It's like, I don't know. I just know the Chevron decision is a big deal. I don't know how to ask the question. So why should the Kansas business community in 2nd Congressional District vote for you?
Well, thanks for hosting this tonight, and thanks for being out. We got a lot of friends in this room and out around the 2nd District because we know each other. We've worked together for a long time in different roles. You know where I am on business issues, on regulation issues, on taxation issues, on human resource issues, on spending issues. There's no surprises here. What you see is what you get. You know, I believe that ultimately we are better off as a state, a district, a country, and as individuals when we allow people the freedom to make their own choices with their own capital, working with others in a competitive marketplace or with their neighbors and their need in a community, whatever it is that motivates them, rather than having, you know, a bunch of, I'll say central planners, that's a bit of an overstatement, but a bunch of elected people or a bunch of unelected people either in Topeka or Washington telling them how to live their lives. I believe that. And so that's what you get. Should I get to serve? I would be very honored to have that opportunity. And I think we can leave things better than we found it, which ought to be the measure for any of us that want to serve.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Just a couple more things. So we are concluded, but I want to just re-mention our sponsors, Lawrence Paper Company, Barbara and Justin Hill. If you don't know, you have used one of their products. You just didn't know it. Forvis, this is the new name, Mazars. I pronounced it correctly, so give me a kudos there. Blue Cross Blue Shield of Kansas. I know we have some Blue Cross folks here. Cox Communications, Integra Technologies, Koch Industries, Intrust Bank, Delta Dental, Next Area Energy, AT&T, and again, I want to thank the reception sponsors, the Bankers Association. We have a very close and special relationship. Does that sound too weird for Doug and I to say have a special relationship?
I love you too, Alan.
Okay. And the rest of the sponsors are listed there. So thank you. I think is there food left over? Is the bar open or is it closed? The bar's closed. So yeah, we'll see you at Bullfrogs. All right, thank you everybody very much for being here.